Welcome to Canada. This is a multicultural country, and we're very fortunate that all of you have chosen to come to Canada or come here however you have arrived. We're lucky. We're the lucky ones here in Canada that you've chosen to come here. We pride ourselves on welcoming all cultures, embracing them. We want you to maintain your culture as you become used to Canada. We want you to keep them both in your hearts. That's very important in our country. I'm here today to talk about family life in Canada and the laws that we use to support families and to protect children. They may be very different than what you've seen. They may be very similar, and we'll talk about that later. But that's basically what my presentation is about today, is about family life in Canada, what it looks like, some of the changes you might see. And I want to ask you what some of those changes or differences are that you see. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. So I'll step a little bit aside here, and so you can see the screen, and we'll go through a little bit here. Winnipeg Child and Family Services is a part of the government of Manitoba, and I think I can speak safely on behalf of the government and say that we recognize that you've overcome a lot of things, may have overcome a lot of challenges to come to Canada, to come to this place, and we appreciate that that can be very difficult. As we talk today, you may find some other challenges as we talk about what families look like in Canada, some of the expectations we have of you as a member of a family or as parents or children in a family, what some of your rights are, what some of your obligations are. So hopefully there are not too many differences for you and the adjustment isn't too difficult. But certainly coming here, lots of challenges. Maybe the first thing I'll talk about is just what a family looks like in Canada, which may be very similar to you, but there may be some differences. First of all, the kind of families. Most families are two parents, a man and a woman, and children. I'll probably through our conversation today talk about my own family. I'm married with a wife and 3 kids who are 18, 14, and 12. So if any of you could give me any advice on how to raise a teenager, please come and see me afterwards. I really use some help with that. But I'll talk about my own family here this afternoon as well. That's the most common arrangement. However, in Canada, it is legal for 2 people of the same sex to marry, to have children. So it is not uncommon to find 2 men who are married, have children, 2 women who are married, have children. That is not uncommon in Canada. That may be very different from where you live, or where your home country is. Single parents, again, not uncommon to see 1 man or 1 woman raising the children because something has happened, the relationship is broken down, and there is only 1 parent left to look after the children. So we do have single parents as well. So I don't know if that's very similar to your country, or that very different, but those are the kinds of families that we have. Also something else I will say that a family, there's no age restriction on that in Canada. We also deal with families where the parents are very young. One of our responsibilities is to try and support families where the parents may be only 14 or 15 or 16 years old. And I want to emphasize, I'm not recommending that you get married or have children when you're 14 or 15 or 16, but it does happen. And you have that right to, with the support of your family and with the help of an organization like ours, to raise those children as a very young parent. Again, not recommended, but those things do happen sometimes. The roles in the family, again, may be similar, may be different. It's more common in Canada for both parents to work outside the home. Both parents, both mother and father, to have jobs outside the home. In my family, I work outside the home. My wife does as well, so we are both away during the day. Which means that while we both share in bringing money into our family through our employment, we also share in the parenting, share the household duties. So that is more common in Canada, is for both parents to work in the house. I'm not a very good vacuum cleaner operator, but I have to do that. Tonight, my wife is working tonight. I'm the cook. That's a very bad night for our kids because I have to cook, and I'm not very good. But that's the way it is because she works too. So it's more common in Canada for both parents to work outside the home and then share parenting responsibilities. Child rearing, probably in Canada, children have more of a voice. Down the street there's an office called the Office of the Children's Advocate, and they are to advocate for children, to make sure that their rights are protected and respected. It's more common for parents to talk to their children rather than just say, well, I'm in charge and you're the child, this is the way it's going to be. There's probably more of a conversation, which is not to say that parents aren't in charge of the family, but there is probably more of a conversation with their children about what they want to do and what they see as solutions to problems and so on. Extended family, Canada, North America is a very big place. There are no boundaries that you can't cross. You can move across Canada, you can live where you want. You can live in the United States. It's not that difficult to cross that border. So as a result, extended family is often spread far and wide. Again, in my family, we have family in Eastern Canada, we have family in Alberta, we have family in the United States. So it's more common for extended family to, my brothers and sisters, to spread and move across Canada. So in our home and in Winnipeg, it's really my wife and I and our 3 kids, and our families have moved elsewhere. Perhaps in your country's family may stay together and live in one home, which is fine. I'm just saying that that maybe one of the differences you might see is families spread farther and wider. Okay, how many of you who are parents, or any of you who are planning to be parents, or hoping to be parents, how many of you went to school to learn to do that job? 0. That's really weird, you know, because I went to school to do my job. If you want to be a lawyer, you have to go to school. If you want to be a doctor, you want to be a teacher, you have to go to school to learn that. I would argue that the hardest job that any of us are going to do, and I'm going to check in with the parents here who are parents, this is the hardest job you're going to do, is be a parent. But you don't go to school to do that. Why is that? Why do we just learn from our parents and their example and try to change some things? And why don't we get more training or education about being a parent? And I say that because in Canada, I think we like to recognize that it is a difficult job, and it's okay to get help and to ask for help. If you're having a difficult time with your teenager, if you have a newborn baby and you're not sure what to do, it's okay to ask for help. To try and understand the different stages that you're going to go through as a parent with your children. It's okay to ask for that kind of help. It may be particularly important for yourselves as new Canadians. There may be some differences that you'll see, some challenges that you'll face. Typically, parents are slower to adjust to life in Canada than kids, because kids are out every day. They're in schools, they're talking to their friends. Their friends say, well, in Canada we get to do this. And they come home and say, well, my friend gets to stay out all night, or I get to date even though I'm only 16. And sometimes parents say, whoa, I don't think I'm ready for that. So there can be challenges with that. The point is it's okay to ask for help. And there's a whole bunch of organizations in Winnipeg that will help parents and specifically new Canadians to make those adjustments, to learn those stages. And it's just fine to ask for that kind of help. One of the documents I gave you is a resource guide, and there's a whole bunch of organizations there listed that are all designed to help new Canadians with their families, and in any way they can to help make parenting job easier, because it's a really hard job. And I'll give you some examples from my family as we go through here, and you'll see that I'm doing a pretty bad job sometimes, and so I could use some help, so that's okay. So there is a law in Canada, there is a law in each province about parenting and what we expect from families and what the rights are for children. And in Manitoba, it's called the Child and Family Services Act. And it was proclaimed by our provincial government in 1985. And it's a law that must be followed by everyone in the province, whether you've been here for 50 years like me or whether you've just arrived. It applies to everybody. Also, just to note that in Manitoba, a child is anybody who is under the age of 18. So when we're talking about children, it's somebody who is younger than 18. At 18, you become an adult in Manitoba. So back to the law here in Canada and the law here in Manitoba. It's called the Child and Family Services Act. And there's really 2 things that you need to know about it. And we'll talk a bit more about the details, but there's really 2 things that you need to know. The first is that family is very important. Families must be supported to have children live safely in their own home. So we think that family is very important. It's where children should be, but it's also where they should be safe. And we will do everything we can to help a family stay together and stay strong. And again, using some of those resources on your list here. Anything that you can secure for yourself, anything we can provide to you to help your family stay together and stay strong, solve all the problems that inevitably come up for a family, that's important. We want families to be together. But the second part of the Act, and this is what sometimes people find quite different, is that the government is interested in families and wants to make sure that children are safe. They want to make sure that they are protected. If they're not safe or they're not protected, the government has the authority to actually take children out of homes. And I'm going to talk about that at quite a bit of length so people understand what that means, and it is a fairly rare occurrence, but the government has that right. So the first thing they want to do, keep families strong. The second thing they want to do is if there are families that are struggling and where children are not safe or are being hurt, the children could be removed. The work that we do, most of the families that we work with at Child and Family Services have their children at home, but they've called us, they've asked for help. They've called us because they have a teenager. The teenager doesn't listen. Any of you who have teenagers know their favorite word is probably no. I'm not going to do that. So you have to learn how to negotiate that with a teenager and work together. So we will help families with teenagers. If you have a very small child, the government and Child and Family Services can help you with that. In fact, in Manitoba, if you have a baby, it doesn't matter who you are or where you are, if you have a baby, you will get a visit shortly after the birth of the baby from a nurse. She will come to your house just to make sure you're okay. Do you know what to do with the baby? Are you able to look after that baby? Can we help you in any way? And if you say, I'm good, and the baby looks good, that's all they're out there is to offer that help. And if you accept it, that's great. If you don't need it, then that's fine too. But that offer will be made. And it's, again, just to underline how important it is that you be successful as a parent and that you have all the things that you need. And certainly looking after a baby, when we brought our babies home, we didn't know which way to hold them. Is it by the legs? Is it by, I don't know. So we needed help with that. So it was good to have somebody come and help us with that. So any of you who have a baby or expecting a baby and the baby arrives, you're probably going to get a knock on the door. It's just a nurse asking, can we help you? So there's lots of ways that we can help families. So what Child and Family Services has done, some other examples that we do, that we offer to families. Parenting, I'll go through these in different order. Parenting, we offer classes for people who want to learn how to be a better parent. The organization that's there, Mosaic, that's cited there, is an organization for new parents, new Canadians particularly, and they speak first language and they will help you with any of the changes or any of the help that you might need. So we can all learn and do more and do better for our kids. So that's something that we do. We also provide respite, homemaker, and family support services. What that means is if you needed somebody to come into your house because somebody was very sick and you couldn't look after your children, you didn't have family around, we could have somebody come to your home to help you. If somebody is very exhausted working with a very difficult child, we could have somebody come in and take the child out for an afternoon away to give you a break. That would be respite. If you're having trouble maintaining your house, cleaning it and cooking, and you really don't have those skills, you really don't know how to cook, we could have somebody come in and teach you those things. All of those things could be provided in your home. Now this is not to replace your family, but people sometimes don't have family around, or everybody's working and they don't have time to do this. So we can provide somebody to come into your home to help you with all those things. Emergency services, that could be a family loses their home, there's a fire, their pipes freeze, whatever happens. Somebody loses a job and there's a money shortage. We would help provide those kinds of things for you on an emergency basis to make sure that your family stays together. So all of those things could be provided to you on an emergency. Again, the whole point, keep your family together, keep it strong, keep it together. Counseling. Obviously, families run best if parents are working together. We see parents sometimes who are arguing, fighting all the time. That's not a great environment for kids. Maybe we can help you sort out your differences so that you're working together as a team, not fighting with each other in front of the kids or throwing things at each other. We can help you and help parents maybe resolve their differences so that they are working together. So those are all some of the things that we do. Children with special needs. Parents sometimes have kids who have special needs. They may have a mental handicap, they may have a physical handicap. We would help you with the equipment, the schools, the transportation, something that you would need. to help your family. We would provide all of those things for you, or arrange for them to be available to you. Daycare. If you are both working as parents, both parents working, there's no family around, there are daycare spaces, there are facilities where you can take your children, leave them with people who are licensed by the province. They will look after your children while you're at work. You come back and get them at the end of the day and go home with them. There's a small fee for that, but it's not that expensive. What is a problem is there's a shortage of those spaces. They're very popular, but there's daycares all around the city that you can have your children stay there if you don't have those kinds of resources available to you. We also, when we do all this work at Child and Family Services, we also benefit from having volunteers, especially volunteers who speak first language. I only speak one language, as you can see, not very well, just English. So we really are pleased to have other people who can help translate and help some of our new Canadian families navigate the system. So we are very pleased to have volunteers as well. So I really want to emphasize that the important part of this act, the most important part, is that we work with families and try to help them in any way that we can. And we get creative and we do all kinds of things to make sure that families are strong and stay together. But the second part of our job at Child and Family Services is to make sure that children are safe. The law says in the second part is that adults aren't allowed to harm children. What do people mean? What do you think that's a phrase from the act? What do people think harm means? What would you consider harming a child?
Well, it can be physically also or otherwise.
Yep. Sorry?
Psychological.
Yep. So it could be physical harm to a child. It could be psychological harm. Yep. We'll talk a bit about what that might look like. Yep. Yep. Those are two good examples. What it means in Manitoba is that a child might be harmed and in need of protection from the people who are supposed to be looking after them if they're being neglected or they're being abused. So we're going to talk about what neglect means and what abuse means. Neglect means basically when parents are not doing what they are supposed to do to look after their children. For example, they are not feeding them. They're not providing them with clothing. They're not keeping them clean. They're not taking them to the doctor. They're not enrolling them in school at the proper age. That's neglecting a child. You are, as a parent, you are obligated to do that. You have to do that. If you don't do that in Canada, there will be a consequence for that. People take that very seriously. So that's an example. Another example is sort of related to that is that we often meet parents who neglect their children because they have so many problems of their own they can't look after them. Very common for us are addictions. So if you have people who are taking drugs, who are gambling, who are drinking alcohol to excess, they put themselves first, they neglect their children. There's no money left over to pay the rent, there's no money left over to buy food. They are intoxicated, so they forget to send their children to school. Those kinds of problems, those parents are neglectful of their children. Sometimes the problem is not so much the parents, sometimes the problem is the child. The child is out of the control of the parents. Somewhere along the line, the child has joined a gang or is stealing cars or something like that, and the parent says, I'm doing my best, but I can't look after him properly because he's running away, he's out all night. That child may be a danger, not so much to himself, but to the family and to himself by just the kind of behavior. It's also neglectful in Manitoba to leave a child under the age of 12 by themselves without an older person supervising. So that's what the law says. Now there's some flexibility, and I'll use an example of my own family. When our kids were younger, and I'm going to say 10 or 11, my wife and I were both out working. The children came home from school. They had a key. They let themselves in, and they waited for a few minutes. And it was a few minutes. It wasn't 2 days. It was a few minutes they waited for us. And they knew that they could call the neighbor, and they knew that they had a cell phone number so they could call us if they needed help. And they were mature kids who could manage that. So for a few minutes, they were okay. And so I would suggest that's going to be fine for your kids too if you need to do that. What's not okay is to leave them alone for several hours, several days. I've met kids who have been alone for a week, who are 5 and 6 years old because the parents have disappeared. That's not appropriate, and there would be action taken on that. So as long as you make some good arrangements for your children, that you have an adult looking after them, or you have an older child. If you're 13 or 14 or 15, you can look after other children. Our daughter is 14, and she took a course to be a babysitter, and so she looks after children. People are going out, they call her over to their house, and she looks after the kids for a while. That's okay, as long as she's older and is able to look after them. And of course, it all depends on how mature the kids are. If they're some kids aren't very mature and couldn't do that even if they're 16 or 17, but the law says that a child under the age of 12 needs to have an older person looking after them. So physical abuse is any injury which is the result of what the parent did. It's not an accident, it's something that a parent deliberately did to the child and injured them. So they have an injury. So they have done something and the result has been an injury. They have a broken arm, they have a bruise, some kind of visible injury. That would be considered physical abuse. It's not an accident, so it's not a child falling down the stairs. Things happen. My kids had bruises all over from playing soccer and getting kicked in a soccer game or falling in the ice or something like that. That's not abuse. That was an accident. But if I pushed them down the stairs or I took a baseball bat and hit them, that would be abuse. So it could happen one time. It could happen a number of times. Something that we see that's fairly common for us to see is parents with babies. They get frustrated with babies. How many people here have a baby at home under the age of 2? 1 year old? Yeah. Do they listen very well? Nah, no, they don't really listen. Do they stop crying when you tell them to stop crying? No. No. So people get kind of frustrated with that. Eh? Stop crying. Pick up the baby and shake the baby. We get it that people get frustrated, but you can injure a child very severely by doing that. So we see babies with head injuries because the parents hit them. Stop crying. Go to sleep. Stop it. And they shake their heads and they rattle their brains and they cause head injuries. So that's pretty common too. So if you have a crying baby, I don't know, get some earplugs. What do you do? I don't know. That's hard. But whatever you do, don't start shaking or hitting babies because that's going to cause you all kinds of trouble. Sometimes people use objects to hit kids. We know people, and I'm going to talk about spanking in a minute. We know people sometimes will use an object to discipline their children. They'll hit them with a belt. They'll hit them with a stick. It is not illegal to do that, but be careful that you don't hurt somebody. Because if you start hitting people with cricket bats and belts and some of the things we've seen parents hit kids with, you increase the chances of injuring them seriously. Okay, so we're going to talk about spanking right away. Everybody knows what spanking is, so hitting kids like that. It is not illegal to do that in Canada. You can do that. There's a debate in Canada. Some people will argue in Canada that it should not be allowed at all. If I want my wife to do something, I don't start hitting her to make sure that she does it. Why would I do that to somebody this big? So some people will argue that you shouldn't be hitting anybody in the family. You shouldn't hit your wife or your husband. You shouldn't be hitting your children. But still, some people believe that it's helpful. At Child and Family Services, we don't think it's particularly helpful. And this document about being the best parents you can be talks a little bit about some of the alternatives to hitting kids. We know that people use that as a device, but we would urge you to do other things. For my kids at home, we don't spank them, but there's some things that we do that are worse. And the worst thing we can do to our kids is take away their iPods. That gets them really upset. They don't want to lose that cell phone or that iPod. They wouldn't know what to do without one. So if there's some problem at our house, say, you know, you're gonna have to give us your cell phone for the day. You were supposed to be home on time. You didn't come home on time, or whatever the problem was. So that would be a consequence for our kids. Maybe you can't go out with your friends tonight. Maybe you can't go to the movie you really wanted to go to. I think there's different kinds of consequences that can be more productive than hitting people. So that's worked for us, but it's more complicated. There's lots of other things to talk about that, and that's probably a whole afternoon to talk about that. But take a look at that pamphlet on being the best parent can be. It does talk about positive discipline. So just be really careful. If you're going to spank somebody, if you're going to spank one of your children, take a deep breath, walk away for a minute, come back. We often find that parents, the worst damage is done when parents react immediately. They just blow up and they whack people and they hit them way too hard and they injure them. We often see, I've met lots of, often fathers, unfortunately, who have said, well, I just spanked him. He was bad and I just hit him. And the child will say to us, well, yeah, but he really hurt me. And he says, no, I just spanked him. So I say, well, let's go to the doctor. Let's see what the doctor says. We go to the doctor, and the doctor examines him. He's got bruises all up and down his leg, bruises all over. That's because the dad's about this big and the kid's about this big, right? You know, you're going to do a lot of damage. Well, I just hit him. Well, yeah, you hit him and you bruised him. We see people hitting with implements. They break bones. We've seen lots of kids with broken arms and things like that because somebody just hits him. You can't do that. You're taking a chance. So if you're going to do that, these are some suggestions. I wouldn't really recommend them, but I wouldn't recommend getting into a physical argument with a 15-year-old. That's not going to turn out well. It says between 2 and 12, over the clothes, and on buttocks with a hand, not an object. I didn't make this slide up, so I'm just going to read what it says. I don't particularly agree with that. Just discipline in positive ways, more positive ways with your kids rather than hitting them. Unfortunately, there is also sexual abuse in our country, in our province, in our city. And that's where adults have sex with kids. Sad but true. So we have kids who are being asked to have sex with adults. We have kids who are, adults expose themselves to them. We have adults who sell their kids, prostitute their kids for sex. We have adults who use children to produce pornography. There's not hundreds of them or thousands of them, but that does happen here, and that is the sexual abuse of children. As the slide on the right says, a child under 16 cannot consent to have sex. So if an adult comes and tells me, well, she was 14, but she wanted to have sex, you can't do that. She's 14. You're an adult. You cannot do that. She can't consent. It doesn't matter what she's saying. You're the adult. You have to act like an adult. Because otherwise, it's considered sexual abuse in Canada. So those are all the kinds of things that we see here. And again, I would probably challenge anybody here who says, no, that's not a problem. It's a big problem, and it's a problem here for us, as I'm sure it is in most countries. And there is consequences for it, which I'll talk about in a minute. There's also, I think what this gentleman was saying, there's also, he was talking about psychological abuse. We put it on the slide here as emotional abuse of children. So that's when just children are repeatedly spoken to in a very negative way. They're called, they're no good, they're worthless, they're bad, they're a mistake, we should never have had you. And people, I know that parents get frustrated, we get frustrated with our kids, but you can't say that every day. If that's all the child hears from you is how useless they are, that's emotionally abusive of them. They shouldn't have to live in that kind of environment with that kind of language being spoken. Or if a parent withholds attention, affection, or privileges over a long period of time. That's not helpful either, to do that for a long, long time. Another problem is children who live in a violent home. That's emotionally abusive. If you've got mother and father fighting all the time, father beating up mother, and the children are there and witness to that, that's not a healthy environment for a child to live in, is to see father come home every night drunk and beat up his wife. So those are the kinds of situations where children may be harmed or be at risk or may need to be protected from neglect or from abuse. So what happens if we find out about that? How is the law enforced here in Canada is what I want to talk about next. First of all, families call us. Our offices are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because problems happen all the time. So families sometimes just call and ask for help. I'm having trouble with my teenager. Can I meet with you and figure out how we can work this out? So that's the most common ways for people to just ask for help themselves. But the law says, the Child and Family Services Act says that it's everybody's responsibility to look after children, so that if you see something that you think is very wrong in a family, you have an obligation to call us. Because I'm not driving around looking for families and peeking in windows or anything like that. You know, I don't do that. But so we hope people will call if they know of a situation that's serious. You have an obligation to report. So as a result, we get calls from people in the community who say, I saw something. I think something should be done about this. We get calls from teachers. I've got a kid here who's come to school today, and he said he hasn't seen his mother or father in a week. She or he has to call us and tell us that. I've got a kid in my class who hasn't eaten all week. There's somebody home, but there's no food there. They would call us. We have doctors and nurses where kids come into the hospital. Dad says that he fell down the stairs. He didn't fall down the stairs. He's been hit by something. They will call us. The police will call us. They'll go out to a home where there's a drinking party. And everybody's intoxicated, and there's two babies in the midst of a bunch of people passed out. They will call us. Because those people are all obligated to call us and tell us that family needs some help. So they will call us, and then we will go out. So when we get these calls, we are required by law. The law is, we're held to this law. Child and Family Services are held to this law. We have to go and investigate. We can't not. We can't hang up or refuse to do that. So the first thing we try and do is get together with families and figure out, okay, what's the problem here? How can we help you? How can we find a solution to your problem? What's the best thing that we can do with us? Sometimes people will say, that'd be great. We'd love to help. And sometimes people say, I don't have a problem. Go away. So we can't do anything more unless there's a situation that we see that we have to act right away. But if we go out to a home and, to use the example before, the parents are all drunk on the floor, we can't leave the baby there. We would take the baby out of that situation. Something that's not uncommon for us in winter is people going shopping, parking their car at a shopping center, leaving the baby in the car while they go shopping. You might have noticed it's cold here. It's 40 below. You can't turn off your car and go shopping and leave the baby in the car. So we will get calls from people in a shopping center who are in the parking lot, and they say, there's nobody in this car. The car is turned off, but there's a baby in the back seat. The baby's sleeping, but it's 40 below. So they wait a few minutes. Nobody shows up. So they call, and we will act right away. We're not going to leave the baby there. With the help of the police or the mall security, wherever, we'll break into the car and get the baby out of there. You can't leave a baby in a car at 40 below. I don't know what people are thinking. I think they think, well, it's kind of warm enough, and I'm only going to be gone a couple hours, and the baby's sleeping, and blah, blah, blah. I don't know how people rationalize that, but they do, and that happens on occasion. So in those kind of situations, we're not asking to talk to the parents. We need to act right away. So we have an obligation to make sure that the child or children are immediately safe. But normally what we try and do is sit down with a family, try and figure out how can we help you, and try to get together a plan. You need to learn more about parenting. You need some marital counseling. You need somebody to help you with your teenager. We can do all that kind of thing. But if the child's in immediate danger, we can act right away. So usually we talk to the parents, make an appointment, come to your house, talk to you, see how we can help. Usually we talk to the parents first, but on occasion we may talk to a child first, which again is, I know, concerning for some people and upsetting even, that we would talk to your children first before we talk to you. And that's usually in a situation where the child has come to school and is very afraid of what's happened at home, doesn't want to go home, so we talk to them first. Because if we talk to them second, the parents will tell them, don't talk. And we'll never find out what is happening at home. So that's where the children have rights here. They can say to the teacher, I'm afraid to go home. My dad is drunk. He has beaten up my wife. I've got a bruise here. I want to tell you my story. We're not going to go home and tell Dad, you want to tell us about that? Because he'll come down and tell the child. Remember, we don't talk about that. So we want to talk to in some cases, extreme cases, we want to talk to the child first. And then we go see the parents after we've got the child's story. We may talk to other people, other family members, just to find out more information, school reports, doctors, as we're trying to find out more about what's happening with this family. Most of the time we're able to work things out, but in the examples I've given you, sometimes we have to take the children out right away to make sure they're safe. If nobody's been there in the home for a week, if they're frozen in a car, if they've been assaulted by their parents, sexually assaulted or physically assaulted, we will take the children out of that situation and make sure that's safe. But as this slide says, we do that only when the children are in immediate danger and there's no other way to keep them safe. So the first thing we do is make sure they're out of the situation that they're in and put them in a safe place. And the thing we often do is try and find, is there a family member that you can stay with, that you'd be safe with? We're not trying to take you away from your whole family. We're just trying to find you a safe place. So we say, oh, I can stay with my auntie, I can stay with my grandma, I can stay with the neighbor because she knows our family very well. We would have the children go and stay there. We would actually pay them to look after the children. So we're not asking people to volunteer to do this without some recognition that might be a burden to them. So we will pay them. So we try and find a family member who will look after them. If there isn't a family member, we will try to find another family in the community. We have a long list of people who are called foster parents, and they have volunteered to take in children who they don't know, but who need a safe place, and they will take them in at sometimes any time of the day or night. We'll look after these kids until the parents can get back on track and they can go home again. So we put them in another home. Again, it's important they be in a family home if it's not their own family, if their own family isn't safe. So wherever possible, CFS places children with a relative or community member. So that's the first thing we do, is make sure the children are safe. Excuse me. The second thing we do is we have to go to court. And again, to go back to the beginning and this gentleman's comment about the rights and you have in Canada, you have rights as a parent. I can't just take your children away without asking a judge for his agreement on that. So what we do is we go to see a judge right away. We say, we have taken this child away for these reasons. And the judge says, well, that's nice. I want to hear from the parents. They have their rights here to be heard in court. And they will come and explain why they decide to leave the baby in the car for 2 hours, or why they decide to leave the home for a week and leave their children alone. So the judge will hear both of those. And then the judge makes the decision as to whether they would stay with us for a while longer until the situation at home improves, or he will say, no, child and family, you've made a mistake, those children need to go back. Now we take our responsibility very seriously, so it's pretty rare that a judge would say that. We're just not driving around town just picking up kids just for fun. We take it very seriously, and so usually the judge will say, no, you have a good reason to do that. The child will stay with Child and Family Services and in this relative's home or in this foster home for a month or two, until the parents have made whatever changes they need to make in their home. And sometimes the kids will stay with us for longer periods because there's big changes. I don't know if any of you have any familiarity with addictions. If you know anybody or have heard of people who have drug or alcohol addictions or gambling addictions, that's pretty hard to stop. It's not gonna, you can't just come in and say, okay, I'm stopping drinking today. I'm good. It doesn't usually work that way. And anybody who knows about that, it's a hard thing to do. So if that's the problem the family is facing, that often means that they may have to go into a drug and treatment facility. They may be there for 3 months until they change, because it's a serious problem that has brought their kids into our care. We want the kids to go back. That's where they should be. They should be with their family. They shouldn't be with us. They should be back with their family. So we will then spend a lot of time and effort working with the family to try to change the situation so the kids can come back home. And through that period, there's regular visits. The kids continue to visit with their parent. We're not trying to hide them. We're not trying to make them disappear. We want the kids to continue to visit, have the parents say, I'm really working hard on my drinking problem. We want you to be back home soon. Hopefully things will be better soon. I will I'll just go back to this slide and just say, that's what we try to do with kids who have been neglected. But people who abuse children have probably another problem. If you've injured your child by breaking their arms with a baseball bat, if you've had sex with your daughter, if you've prostituted children, the police, the real police, not the child police, the real police, the guys you see driving around the city, they get involved. And they will charge you with assault or sexual assault of children, or whatever the charge will be. They will charge you and you may go to jail. So it might be a while before you have your kids back if you've decided to beat them up or have sex with them or emotionally abuse them in a very, very serious way. It's not just Child and Family Services who is interested in that. The police become interested in that. The Winnipeg Police Department has a child abuse unit. They specialize. That's all they do is work with child victims of abuse. So they have a whole team of people that works just with that. So in the vast majority of cases, the kids go back home. Parents, our children are precious to us, and people will do almost anything to have their children back and return to them. So they reclaim their children. The children go back home. They may have been with us for a month or 3 months or 6 months, but they make the changes and home they go. And we continue to work with them to make sure that things stay safe and calm. In some cases, though, parents don't do the work. They don't make the changes. They're not willing to work hard. Unfortunately, I've met parents who think drinking is more important than their kids. They think a life of crime. They think a life that involves violence towards other people, that takes them in and out of jail. They've decided that's more important to them than their kids. So we do have some kids who come into our care permanently. The government becomes their guardians. We become the legal guardians of these children because of what's happened, some of the things that have happened at home. And the law also says that we can't wait forever for parents to change. If you've got a baby and say a family with a drinking problem, that baby shouldn't have to wait for 5 or 6 years for those parents to stop drinking. The judges are very severe with young children. They say that we want this child home, and we want them home soon. We don't want to wait 5 years while you decide if you're going to stop robbing banks or beating up your wife or drinking or taking drugs. You have to make some changes now if you want to look after your children. So for some kids, they come to us as their guardians. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I'll get to parents' rights in a minute. I want to talk a little bit about that process, and I'll talk about my own family. As I said at the outset, we have, my wife and I, we have 3 kids, and 2 of them are children who were in the care of Child and Family Services. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that worked. So Child and Family Services, in the case of our 2 kids, decided that these children could not go home. And they're different stories, and I'll tell you the stories in a minute, but they decided they couldn't go home. And so what they wanted to do is find them another family. They should be in a family. They shouldn't be in an orphanage. They shouldn't be in an institution. They shouldn't not have the opportunity to be raised by a family. So for kids who are in our permanent care, if they can't go home to the birth parents, we need to find another family. And the first thing we will do, again, is go back to their own family and say, well, your mother and dad aren't able to look after you, but we want to find another family member who can. Maybe your auntie, maybe your cousin could take you in. We'll find somebody in your family. If we can't find anybody in your family, we will try to find another person in this community who would look after you and claim you as their own and be your parents. So for my wife and I, that's the situation we found ourselves in, and this is before I worked for Child and Family, is they came to us. Well, first of all, we came to them and said we would be interested in adopting a child. We would be willing to take in a child who cannot live with their own parents. And they said, okay, well, we need to get to know who you are, make sure you're not crazy people, and then we'll put you on a list. So they did that, and they called us and said, well, we have this boy here. He's almost 2 years old, and his mother has tried and tried, but she can't look after him. She's not going to change her life enough to look after him. But he needs another family. There's nobody else in his birth family who can look after him. Would you be interested? So we said, yeah, we'd be interested. So they made sure that we were okay and that we were good people, and then we started to get to know him. He was in a foster home with some family that was looking after him, but they weren't going to look after him forever. They wanted him to find a forever family. So we met, and over the course of a month, we eventually got to know them and got to know him, and eventually we took him home, and we went to court with the Child and Family Services, and we became his adoptive parents. So he is ours. He knows he's adopted. He knows his birth family is out there someplace. He hasn't met them. It's not probably safe for him to meet them yet, but he knows, and he actually has pictures of them. And one day he may meet them. That'll be kind of up to him and up to them. But he's our child. They can't come and get him. He's adopted. It's legal. The court's made it legal. They can't come and get him now and take him away. So he is with us and is our kid. He's a great kid. So we liked that so much we went back and said, well, we'd be willing to have a second child. So they said, well, you know, we do have one. This is a little girl, and she has, her parents were only 18. And this was an accident. They didn't mean to have a baby. It just happened. And they would like to give the child to another family. And they would like Child and Family Services to help them, because they want a good family to raise their baby, but because they said, I don't think we can do it. As it turned out, they had just broken up. They weren't even together. They were 18 years old. They said, this isn't going to work. We can't do this. So they, Child and Family Services worked with them, and they said, we want to meet different people, so we can just make a choice. So they interviewed a whole bunch of people, including my wife and I, and we were lucky enough that they picked us. And so she came home to us when she was about 6 weeks old, because they never took her home. They had her at the hospital, and then they said, we can't take her home, but we'd like to help find another family for her. So, so they found us. So that was a lucky day for us, and she's also a great kid who's doing very well. Now she knows also that she's adopted. It's not a secret. In Canada, we used to keep that a secret, and it wasn't very helpful, because kids would wake up at 28 years old and say, wow, you're not my birth parents? I just got some medical information. You're not my parents? Yeah, we didn't tell you you were adopted. And that doesn't work out very well. So we talk about it now much more openly about that. So, so she knows that she's adopted, and we have had contact with her parents, and we know them, and they maybe once or twice a year will come to our house to see her. And she knows that we're her parents, and she doesn't run to them. They're kind of strangers to her, but she knows they're out there, and so that's a good thing. And then we had a third child, our youngest. Somehow we had a birth child, and he's the unhappiest member of the family because he's not adopted. And he would really like to be adopted. So if any of you know and he would like to adopt a child, we have a 12-year-old who wished he had an adoptive family too. He said, well, they've got 4 parents. My brother and sister have 4 parents, and I've only got 2. I've only got you. So if things don't work out well for me as a teenager, I don't have any choices. I've got to stay here. So he would like to be adopted. So if any of you would like to adopt a 12-year-old who likes basketball, he's looking for an adoptive family. So that's our family. So that's what we try to do with kids who come into our care permanently. We do not want them to stay in institutions. We want to find a family for them. So that's something we're committed to do. Talk a little bit about rights. Actually, before I talk about that, I should say about Child and Family Services and almost all of the organizations on your resource list, the services are free. I really want to emphasize that. I want to emphasize that to indicate the commitment that the government's made. This is very important to government. They don't want not having enough money be an obstacle for you to get help with your family. They want you to be able to go down and say, I need help, and it will be provided. Usually at the beginning of this presentation, when I ask people what's different about Canada, somebody often says taxes, right? Taxes, yeah. That's it. Why do we have so many taxes? You go into a store, you buy something for $5. It says $5. Is it $5? No, it's like $6.50 or something, right? Because there's taxes. So that's the bad part. So somebody always puts up their hand in the room and says, that's one thing different about Canada. I don't like Canada. They charge, there's so many taxes. Well, the good side is that all those taxes are going to pay for things, like Child and Family Services, like many of the organizations on that resource list, like hospitals, like education. That's what your taxes are going to pay for. So you may think it's a good idea or a bad idea, but that's how it is in Canada. Is those taxes are collected to provide services that you don't have to pay for. Your education is free up to grade 12. You go into the hospital, they don't ask you for cash. They say, come on in. The government of Manitoba is covering the cost of all of this. So they cover the cost of this, and they cover the cost of all of these services that are available. So we, anything that you wanted, the help you wanted, counseling, homemakers, all that kind of stuff, there's not a charge. You also have the legal right. Any action that we took, you have the right to have a lawyer. As I said, before we can move forward to do anything, we have to get a judge's permission. So you have a lawyer. If you can't afford a lawyer, the court will pay for a lawyer. So you have a right to dispute the decision. You have a right to free legal service. You also have the right to involve anybody you want in your family business. If you care to, bring in family members, a elder, a leader in the community, a friend to help talk to child and family. That's all fine. Interpretation, I think one of the reasons people ask me to come here to speak is that I work with a group of social workers. Those are the helpers who work with families who speak many languages. One of the teams I work with has 6 members of the team. They probably speak altogether about 20 different languages, so that we can talk to people in first language. So you have a right to that. That is one of your rights, is to ask for service in your language, and we would try to provide it. Sometimes it's tough. We just met one guy. He's the only guy in Winnipeg who speaks this language. There is no other person. So that's been tough because he's the only, I can't remember what language it is, but he's the only person. We've canvassed the whole city. There's 700,000 people in Winnipeg. He's the only one who speaks this language. So that's been harder. Certainly ask questions, express your concerns. Of course, we have a complaint process and so on. So basically, I guess the points, I'm going to stop talking and maybe ask you to talk some more. I think the 3 things I want to say is that for Child and Family Services, supporting families is the main thing that we do, but we also have this obligation to protect children. That's a smaller part of our work. It's also fairly small. I don't want to overstate this. Winnipeg is a city of about 700,000 people. We are working with about maybe 1,000 families, so it's a pretty small number. And most of those, about 700 of those would have their children at home. We're just trying to make the home better. And for a smaller number, their children are in care temporarily, hopefully going back home. But those are, again, very serious situations where the children needed to be protected from their family until the family makes some changes. But it is a very small. I would expect that none of you will have contact with Child and Family Services. But you can ask for help from us or from any of the organizations on that, and I would hope you would not be afraid to ask for that help, because it's really a tough job being a parent. And then I guess the last thing I want to say is thank you for listening, and I do want to save time for questions, because there's always questions and debates, so we'll save a bit of time for that. But I do wish you well in your journey here to Canada. I assure you, I guarantee you, it will warm up. It will get better.